The last signal from Kepler station. The stars had always told stories. Commander Zara Voss had spent 15 years listening to them. Tonight they were screaming. Kepler station hung in the silent dark like a jewel threaded through the void, a marvel of human engineering orbiting the gas giant Yndara 7 some 44 light-years from Earth. Its curved corridors hummed with recycled oxygen, its observation decks gleamed with polished titanium, and its 1,200 crew members slept or worked in 3 rotating shifts, each one believing, as humans always did, that tomorrow would be manageable. Zara did not share that optimism tonight. She stood at the primary sensor console, her dark eyes scanning a cascade of data streams that no algorithm had been built to interpret. The signal had arrived 18 minutes ago, not on any standard frequency, not in any coded language, not in any waveform humanity had ever produced. It had come from below, from the upper atmosphere of Yndara 7, and it had done something no signal had ever done before. It had spoken her name. Zara Voss. We have watched. We are ready. Open the gate or we will open it for you. Her second-in-command, Lieutenant Orrin Becky, was at her shoulder in seconds. He was tall, composed, with the kind of steady calm that made soldiers trust him with their lives. But his jaw tightened as he read the translated text. That's not a greeting, he said quietly. That's an ultimatum. No, Zara replied. It's a test. She had spent 3 years studying xenolinguistic theory. She knew what first contact was supposed to look like. It was supposed to be cautious, uncertain, curious. This was none of those things. Whatever had sent that message had studied humanity long enough to move past the pleasantries. The third member of the bridge crew that night was Dr. Lyra Shen, lead xenobiologist, a woman who had dedicated her life to the question of whether anything else lived among the stars. She was trembling now, not with fear, Zara realized, but with the overwhelming weight of being right. They've been here the whole time, Lyra whispered. Inside the atmosphere. Hiding. Within the hour, Kepler station received its second message. This one came with an image. The being that filled their screens was unlike anything in any xenobiology database. It stood roughly bipedal but radiated into 4 limb-like appendages at its upper half, each ending in a cluster of semi-transparent sensory organs that shifted color as it moved. Its skin, if it could be called that, appeared to be a living lattice of bioluminescent tissue, pulsing in slow rhythms like breathing coral. Its face was an arrangement of wide visual receptors around a central membrane that vibrated when it communicated. It called itself a Vethran. And it did not come alone. Behind the Vethran ambassador in the transmission, Zara could see the staggering shadow of a fleet. Hundreds of vessels, each 1 kilometer or more in length, hovering at the edge of the gas giant's upper cloud layers. They had been there, sensors now confirmed, for at least 3 weeks, cloaked in a way that human technology had not been designed to detect. They let us see them now on purpose, Orrin said. They wanted to make sure we understood the scale before we responded. Zara opened a channel to Earth. The 18-minute signal delay meant she was effectively on her own. She took a breath, looked into the camera, and said 5 words that would later be carved into a monument on 3 different planets. Kepler station. We are listening. The Vethran ambassador, who eventually offered the name Relkathsan, explained in halting but technically precise language that the Galactic Dominion had been monitoring human expansion for 67 years. The Dominion was an alliance of 11 species, bound by a governing body called the Orithene Conclave, which had a single foundational law. No species below a certain threshold of civilizational maturity could be permitted to travel beyond their own solar system. Humanity had been past that threshold for 11 years. The Vethrans had delayed. The Conclave had debated. Now the debate was over. Humanity was to be offered one of 2 choices. Voluntary integration into the Dominion under a provisional governance framework, surrendering all independent military development and interstellar expansion rights for a period of no less than 300 years, or removal. Relkathsan did not explain what removal meant. He did not need to. Zara kept her voice level. She asked for time. Relkathsan gave her 72 hours. Then the transmission ended. Orrin turned to her. What do we do? She was already pulling up every scrap of data she had on the Vethran fleet's position, their energy signatures, their communication patterns. Her hands moved fast and her mind moved faster. Humanity had not survived ice ages and plagues and its own worst impulses by surrendering at the first sign of something bigger than itself. We stall, she said. And we send everything we know back to Earth. She paused, looking out at the dark curve of Yndara 7. And then we find out what they're afraid of. Because they are afraid of something. No one this powerful gives ultimatums unless they're unsure of the answer. In the upper atmosphere below, 1,000 alien ships held their breath. And Zara Voss began to plan. The War Council of New Carthage. Mars had never been beautiful. That was why humanity loved it. New Carthage was the largest city on the Red Planet. 3 million people living under a network of pressurized domes that spread across the Tharsis Plateau like a diagram of the human brain. It was loud, efficient, overcrowded, and perpetually under construction. It smelled of recycled air and industrial coolant and the particular metallic sharpness of Martian soil after a dust storm. It was, in short, exactly the kind of place where humans made important decisions. The Emergency Joint Command had been convened 6 months after Zara's first contact report reached Earth. By then, the veterans had extended their ultimatum twice, each time with less patience, each time with a slightly larger visible fleet. The Galactic Dominion was not accustomed to waiting. No empire ever was. The chamber was a vast circular room at the core of the Carthage governance complex, ringed with displays showing real-time feeds from every human colony and military installation. At the center of the round table sat 7 individuals, each representing a different facet of humanity's capacity to respond. Admiral Karen Dast commanded the Sol Defense Fleet, a man built like a geological formation, with gray-streaked hair and the quiet, absolute authority of someone who had fought in 2 colonial conflicts and never once raised his voice to win an argument. He did not raise it now. "We have 112 warships rated for deep space combat," he said. "The veterans have a confirmed count of over 800 vessels in the Yundara sector alone. Whatever else we decide today, we are not winning a direct engagement." "Not yet," replied Dr. Maren Caulfield, director of the Prometheus Advanced Research Division. She was 62 years old, compact and precise, with a mind that operated like a surgical instrument. She set a data pad on the table. "6 months ago, my team did not understand veteran cloaking technology. We do now. And more importantly, we understand why they use it." Every face in the room turned toward her. "The veterans cloak because they are vulnerable during energy transitions," she explained. "When a veteran vessel charges its primary weapons array, it cannot simultaneously maintain a cloak. There is a window, approximately 19 seconds, where every ship in their fleet is completely visible and momentarily unable to fire." She paused. "They've never had an enemy who knew this. Because they've never fought an enemy who was paying attention to their energy signatures rather than running from their ships." The third key figure at the table was someone no military council had ever included before. Asha Torrens, a 16-year-old prodigy from the Europa Research Station who had, at the age of 13, independently derived a new model of quantum field interference that had taken the physics community 2 years to verify. She sat slightly too small for her chair and was chewing on the end of a stylus with focused intensity. "The 19-second window is useful," she said, not looking up from the calculations spread across her tablet. "But it's not the key. The key is that they don't know we know." Admiral Dast studied her. "And you think that matters?" "It's the only thing that matters," Asha said. She finally looked up. Her eyes were the color of deep water and carried the unsettling steadiness of someone who had never learned to be impressed by rank. "Every military advantage is temporary. The only permanent advantage is that the enemy doesn't know what you know. The moment they find out about our knowledge of their vulnerability, they'll fix it. So we can't use it until we're ready to use it everywhere, all at once, decisively." Silence settled over the table. It was the kind of silence that follows a good idea. The plan that emerged from the New Carthage Council over the following weeks was not a plan of resistance. It was a plan of preparation, a layered strategy built on the assumption that humanity needed to buy time without appearing to stall, needed to build strength without appearing to arm, and needed to forge alliances without appearing to seek them. This last point was where Commander Zara Voss came back into the picture. During her 72 hours of negotiation with Relkath-san above Yundara 7, Zara had noticed something that she had kept out of her official report and communicated only in a personal encrypted message to Earth's Intelligence Directorate. The veteran ambassador had, 3 times during their conversations, glanced to his left, toward a member of his own delegation, with an expression that Zara, trained in xenolinguistics, identified as something close to shame. Or perhaps fear. The Galactic Dominion, it seemed, was not as united as it wanted humanity to believe. Through 17 months of careful indirect communication, conducted through relay probes and encrypted quantum channels, Zara established contact with a faction within the Dominion known as the Kethri Accord, a group of 3 species who had joined the Dominion not by choice but by conquest, and who had been waiting for decades for anyone capable of tipping the balance of power. They were not warriors. They were engineers, historians, and diplomats. But they knew the Orathene Conclave's weaknesses as intimately as a prisoner knows the schedule of their guards. "You are not the first species they have done this to," said Orvith, the Ketheri representative, in their first face-to-face transmission. She was a being of crystalline, segmented structure, beautiful in the way mathematics is beautiful, and her voice carried the flat, careful precision of someone choosing every word with full awareness of its weight. "But you may be the last. If you can survive the convergence." "What is the convergence?" Zara asked. "It is what they call the moment of forced integration," Orvith replied. "When the Conclave brings the full weight of the Dominion fleet against a resistant species. It has never failed. Every species that resisted has either been integrated or..." She paused. "Archived." "Archived," Zara repeated. "Reduced. Preserved. But no longer a participant in the living galaxy." Back in New Carthage, Asha Torrens looked up from her calculations and made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a gasp. "Then we just have to do something the Dominion has never seen," she said. "We have to win." No one laughed, because no one was sure she was wrong. The fire beneath Europa. Theme: invention and desperation. 40 kilometers beneath the frozen surface of Europa, in a cavern carved from ancient ice and lit by the cold blue glow of fusion lamps, humanity built its secret weapon. The facility had no official name on any record accessible outside a 5-person clearance list. Internally, the scientists called it the Cradle. It occupied a pressurized volume the size of a small city block, connected to the ocean above by a series of sealed transit tunnels and powered by a microfusion array that produced enough energy to light a mid-sized Earth city. It was the most expensive construction project in human history, completed in 11 months because no one had slept more than 4 hours a night for 11 months. Asha Torrens had not slept more than 3. She moved through the cradle with the authority of someone who had stopped caring what anyone thought of her the moment she understood what was at stake. At 17 she was the youngest person in the facility. She was also, by unanimous consensus of the other 43 scientists present, the most important one. "Run the simulation again," she told her lead engineer, a broad-shouldered woman named Dex Halverson who had a habit of speaking in complete sentences even when everyone around her was fragmenting into exhausted shorthand. "We've run it 216 times, Dex said patiently. "I know. Run it 217. The device they were building had no precedent in physics textbooks because it operated on a principle that had not existed in physics textbooks until Asha wrote it down. She called it a cascade resonance disruptor, a name that told engineers what it did but said nothing about why it worked, which was the deliberate choice of someone who understood that understanding could be dangerous if it arrived in the wrong hands. The simplified version: every Vethran vessel ran on a specific form of dark energy siphoning that required a precisely tuned quantum field to remain stable. Disrupt the field, and the siphoning became catastrophically self-reinforcing. The ships would not explode. They would simply stop. Every system at once. Shields, weapons, propulsion, life support. A fleet of 800 vessels reduced, in approximately 90 seconds, to 800 very large, very cold pieces of debris. The problem was range. Asha's device, in its current form, had an effective radius of roughly 1,000 kilometers. The Vethran fleet in the Yundara sector was spread across nearly 300,000 kilometers of space. This was where Orvith and the Kethri Accord became essential. "We can provide you with resonance relay nodes," Orvith told Asha during a transmission that took 12 minutes to establish and required 3 layers of counter-surveillance masking. "Devices that amplify and propagate a quantum field disruption across a much wider volume. They are standard Dominion infrastructure, used for communication. No one will notice them arriving." "You'd be giving us weapons technology," Asha said. "We would be giving you what we wish someone had given us," Orvith replied. 40 years ago. The relay nodes arrived disguised as asteroid mining equipment, passed through 3 separate cargo transfers, and were installed across the outer Sol system by a crew of 8 people who believed they were upgrading communication infrastructure. Only 2 of them knew what the equipment actually was. Back in the cradle, the other critical challenge was human in nature, not technological. Because the cascade resonance disruptor, when it fired, would also disrupt every human vessel within range that used compatible quantum field technology. Which was, at current count, all of them. "We need to make our fleet immune before we can use the weapon," Dex said, setting 3 cups of something hot on the table and sitting down with the deliberate heaviness of someone who had been on their feet for 11 hours. "Not immune," Asha said. "Differently tuned. If we shift our quantum field resonance frequency by a factor of 0.7 across every human vessel before the convergence, the disruption wave will pass through us without engaging. Can we retune every ship in the Sol Defense Fleet? In 8 weeks? No. Asha picked up her cup. In 12 weeks? Probably not. In 17 weeks. She finally looked up, and for the first time in days, something like a smile crossed her face. The veterans gave us a deadline of 19 weeks for the convergence. I checked the Kethri intel twice. They are exact about their timelines. Dex stared at her. You are telling me we have a 2-week margin. I am telling you, Asha said, that we have exactly the time we need. Which is not the same as enough time. But it will do. High above Europa, Admiral Karen Dast was already transmitting new orders to every shipyard in the solar system. The retuning process began that night. 309 vessels. Each one quietly, carefully, invisibly modified, not to fight better but to survive what was coming. In the deep ocean above the cradle, strange creatures moved through the ancient dark of Europa's hidden sea, entirely indifferent to the fact that the most significant engineering project in the history of their neighboring species was being completed 40 kilometers below them. 19 weeks. The clock was running. The convergence begins. Theme: sacrifice and battle. They came at 0400 hours, Seoul Standard Time. Not because they knew what that meant, but because they had calculated, with the cold precision of an empire accustomed to winning, that it was the moment of lowest human biological alertness. The Galactic Dominion's convergence fleet emerged from FTL in a formation that covered a volume of space larger than Earth's moon. 847 vessels, each one a cathedral of alien engineering, their hulls inscribed with the bioluminescent script of the Orithene Conclave, their weapons charging in slow, confident sequence. They had done this before. They had won before. Commander Zara Voss was already awake. She had been awake for 22 hours. She stood on the bridge of the ESS Unbroken, Earth's most advanced warship and her flagship for this operation, and watched the sensor feeds paint the Dominion fleet across her screens in red. Oren stood at her left. Lieutenant Commander Fain Osei, her tactical officer, a young man who had grown up in Lagos and trained at the Lunar Military Academy, stood at her right with the absolute stillness of someone who has accepted what is coming. They're in position, Oren said quietly. All 800. Zara opened a fleet-wide channel. Her voice carried to every ship in the human formation. 112 vessels, retuned and ready, positioned not in defensive formation but in a loose dispersal pattern that looked, to Dominion sensors, like the disorganized panic of a species that had no strategy. This is Commander Voss, she said. You know why we're here. You know what they think of us. Let's show them what humans do when someone tells us we're not enough. She closed the channel. Osei, light them up. The ambush began not with weapons but with communication. Zara opened a direct channel to Relkath-san, who appeared on her screen with the smooth confidence of an ambassador who had delivered surrender terms to dozens of species and expected no surprises. Commander Voss, he said. The deadline has passed. The convergence is formal. This is your final opportunity to accept voluntary integration. I know, Zara said. I've been thinking about that. You said no species that resisted the convergence has ever survived. She tilted her head slightly. Has any species ever made you wait this long before saying no? Relkath-san's sensory clusters shifted color. No. Good, she said. Then you might want to pay attention. Because we've been using the time. She closed the channel and nodded to Asha Torrens, who was patched in from the cradle on Europa, 18 minutes away by signal, but whose part in this had already been played. The relay nodes, distributed across the outer Sol system and through the Yundara corridor by Kethri operatives, were already active. The Cascade Resonance Disruptor had been modified over the past 3 months into a distributed system, not a single weapon but a network, each node amplifying and propagating the disruption wave at the speed of light. Asha had pressed the activation sequence 4 minutes ago. The Dominion fleet had no idea. The first sign the veterans had that something was wrong was the silence. One by one across the battle formation their energy readings shifted. Not dramatically, not at first. A flicker. A hesitation. The 19-second window that Dr. Caulfield had identified opened across 847 ships simultaneously, and in that window, every single vessel in the Dominion fleet became fully visible and completely unable to fire. Admiral Dast did not waste a second. Sol Fleet, engage. What followed was not a battle in the traditional sense. It was a surgical operation executed by people who had spent 19 months preparing for exactly this moment. Human ships moved with a coordinated precision that stunned Dominion tactical analysts, because human ships were not supposed to maneuver like that, were not supposed to communicate at that speed, We're not supposed to adapt mid-engagement with that degree of creativity. No species with such a short spaceflight history was supposed to fight like this. The Dominion had studied human history. They had read about the wars, the failures, the centuries of conflict. They had concluded that humans were violent but not strategic, aggressive but not disciplined. They had drawn exactly the wrong lesson. The violence was a surface feature. Beneath it was something else entirely, a species that had survived by adapting, by learning, by turning every defeat into a lesson. Humanity had failed and failed and failed again across 10,000 years of history. The Dominion had been winning for so long they had forgotten what losing teaches. The disruption wave reached full effect in 91 seconds. Systems across the Dominion fleet began to cascade into failure. Not catastrophically, Asha had tuned the device to disable rather than destroy, a choice that had been debated intensely and ultimately affirmed by Zara, who understood that the goal was not revenge but resolution. Ships went dark. Weapons went silent. In the center of the Dominion formation, Relkithsan's flagship, the Conclave Arbiter, shuddered as its primary systems failed and its crew found themselves breathing recycled air in darkness, surrounded by 308 active human warships that had not fired a single weapon. "Open a channel," Zara said. Relkithsan appeared on her screen. He was a different creature than she had met 2 years ago. The confidence was still there, it ran too deep to vanish in a moment, but it was cracked at the edges, and behind it she could see something ancient, the expression of a mind encountering the genuinely unexpected for the first time. "We are not interested in destroying you," Zara said. "We are not interested in surrender, yours or ours. We are interested in talking. As equals." She leaned forward slightly. "And now I think you're interested in that too. The new accord, humanity takes its place. Theme: diplomacy, legacy and hope." The station had no gravity of its own. It rotated slowly in the dark, midway between two stars in a system that no species claimed, a deliberate piece of neutral architecture built 10,000 years ago for exactly this kind of moment, the moment when two forces, neither willing to kneel, had to find a third option. Zara Voss arrived without weapons. She had argued about this with Admiral Dast for 4 days. Dast had wanted armed escorts, a defensive formation, a show of continued strength. Zara had wanted to walk in carrying nothing but the evidence of what humanity had already accomplished. "They know what we can do," she had told him. "Showing up armed tells them we're afraid of them. Showing up unarmed tells them we understand that the conversation is the point now." Dast had looked at her for a long time. Then he had said, "You better be right," with the tone of a man who had committed to trusting someone else's judgment for the first time in his career. She was accompanied by Oren, Dr. Caulfield and Asha Torrens, who had turned 18 2 months ago and celebrated by submitting a 600-page theoretical framework for a new generation of quantum field technology that the physics community was still working through. They were met at the docking ring by Relkithsan. He looked different out of the context of a fleet command. Smaller, in a way, not physically but in the way that authority looks different when it is no longer backed by overwhelming force. He studied the 4 humans who had stepped into his world, and Zara watched his sensory clusters shift through several colors before settling into something she had learned to read as thoughtfulness. "You came without guards," he said. "Yes." "Why?" "Because we're not afraid of you," she said. "And I wanted you to understand that from the first moment." The negotiation that followed lasted 11 days. It was conducted in a chamber with curved walls and no chairs. Veteran architecture did not favor sitting, which meant that Zara and her team spent 11 days standing for 8 to 12 hours at a stretch, which would have been torture for any delegation that had not spent years on military service. The Orithene Conclave sent 7 representatives. The Kethri Accord, formally acknowledged now, their existence as a dissenting faction within the Dominion confirmed and no longer secret, sent 3. Orvith was among them, her crystalline form catching the station's light and scattering it in patient, geometric patterns across the walls. The central issue was not, it turned out, territory or technology or weapons. It was the founding law of the Dominion itself, the threshold of civilizational maturity that had been used to justify the integration or archiving of dozens of species. Humanity wanted it abolished. The Conclave wanted it preserved but reformed. The Kethri wanted it replaced entirely with something new. It was Asha who broke the deadlock on the 8th day, when she stood up in the middle of a circular argument and said something that stopped every translator in the room simultaneously. "The threshold exists because you're afraid of what immature civilizations do with advanced technology. You've been watching humanity for 67 years. You watched us develop nuclear weapons. You watched us have wars. You watched us pollute our own planet and then argue about whether we were doing it." She paused. And then you watched us, over 112 years, put those weapons down. Clean our oceans. Build stations on other planets. And then, when you threatened us with everything you had, you watched us not destroy you when we had the chance. She let that sit. No one spoke. That is what civilizational maturity looks like, she said. Not the absence of violence. The choice not to use it when you could. We had the weapon. We fired it in a way that disabled your fleet without killing a single crew member. If you cannot recognize that as the behavior of a mature civilization, then your threshold is not measuring what you think it is. Rel'Kathsan's clusters shifted to a color Zara had never seen before. She would later learn, from Orvith, that it was the Vethran expression for encountering an argument you cannot refute. The agreement that emerged from Arathis Prime was called the Solara Compact, named for humanity's star. It abolished the Dominion's forced integration protocol. It established a new framework for first contact that centered consent, exchange, and demonstrated behavior rather than arbitrary metrics. It gave the Ketheri Accord full member species status within a restructured governing body, no longer called the Orithine Conclave but the Assembly of Living Worlds. And it gave humanity a permanent seat at that table. Not as a subject. Not as a provisional member under restricted rights. As a founding voice in something new. Zara signed the compact on behalf of Earth and all human colonies with a pen that Orin had carried in his jacket pocket since New Carthage, because she had told him on the day they left that if they were going to make history, they were going to do it with something that had held ink before. When it was done, Rel'Kathsan approached her. He did not offer a hand. Vethrans did not shake hands as she knew, but he extended one of his upper appendages and held it parallel to hers, close but not touching. In Vethran custom, Orvith translated quietly from beside her, "This gesture means, I see you now as I should have seen you from the beginning." Zara held her arm up beside his. "Tell him, we accept that," she said. "And tell him that in human custom it means the same." Back on Earth, when the news reached the planet on a 14-minute signal delay, the first person to hear it was a technician at the Deep Space Relay Station in New Zealand who was on the third hour of a night shift and had been expecting nothing more dramatic than routine telemetry. When the confirmation signal came through and she understood what it said, she sat very still for almost a full minute before standing up and shouting something that woke up the entire facility and was, in its honesty and joy and complete lack of diplomatic precision, exactly what 2 billion years of biological evolution had been slowly, stubbornly building toward. She shouted, "We did it. We actually did it." In the cradle beneath Europa's ocean, Asha Torrens received the news alone, standing at the edge of the ice cavern where she had built the device that changed everything. She stood there for a long time looking at the frozen vault above her, and she thought about all the species the Dominion had archived, reduced, preserved, silenced, and she thought about the ones who had resisted and been broken, and she thought about the ones in the Ketheri Accord who had waited 40 years for someone who might tip the scale. She thought, we were not the strongest. We were not the most advanced. We were not the oldest. We just refused to stop. That was it. That was all of it. The whole answer distilled into the simplest possible truth. Humanity had won not because it was the best, but because it was the most stubbornly, irrepressibly, incomprehensibly persistent species in a galaxy that had never encountered anything quite like it before. Above her, Europa's hidden ocean moved in the dark. Somewhere out among the stars, 11 newly acknowledged species were reading the text of the Solara Compact for the first time. Somewhere, Zara Voss was drinking something warm and looking out a porthole at the stars she had spent her life listening to. And in 1,000 languages, spoken by creatures of light and crystal and bioluminescence and carbon and silicon and forms that had no human name, one idea was beginning to travel across the galaxy like a signal. Humans. Watch the humans. Something interesting is happening with the humans.